Every empire rests on power, but power is never simple. Some conquerors ruled through loyalty or law, others ruled through fear. And when fear was needed, they turned to punishments designed not just to kill, but to warn. Punishments that made soldiers obey without hesitation. Punishments that made cities surrender without resistance. Punishments meant to be remembered. Here are 10 of the most brutal and cruelest punishments ever ordered by conquerors, starting from the least horrific and ending with one that almost defies belief. Number 10. Shaka Zulu. Rib crushing. Thigh of the elephant. Shaka Zulu built one of the most disciplined armies Africa had ever seen, and he enforced that discipline with a punishment his warriors feared more than any enemy. When he took power, the Zulu fighting style was loose, chaotic, and often relied on throwing spears from a distance. Shaka wanted the opposite: tight formations, close combat, absolute obedience. So if a soldier hesitated, broke formation, or showed even a hint of fear, Shaka ordered the thigh of the elephant. The guilty man was forced onto his side while several warriors jumped onto his chest with their full weight. Ribs snapped instantly. Lungs collapsed. Most victims died from suffocation or crushed organs within minutes. Others lingered, gasping for air while the army watched. This became one of the most feared disciplinary punishments in Zulu military history. For Shaka, this wasn't unnecessary cruelty. This was how you build warriors who never waver, who fought shoulder to shoulder, who feared disappointing their king more than they feared the spear of an enemy. His army became unstoppable because no man wanted to be the one lying on the ground, hearing the crack of his own ribs beneath the warrior's feet. And this is only 10, the punishment used to keep his own soldiers in line. What comes next was used for enemies. Number 9. Alexander the Great, burning Bessus alive. Alexander conquered half the known world before turning 30. But one punishment showed just how far he would go when someone betrayed the idea of kingship itself. After Darius III fled from Alexander and was later murdered by his own satrap, Bessus, Alexander reacted with fury. To him, killing a king, even an enemy king, was an unforgivable violation. In Alexander's mind, only a king had the right to judge a king. So when Bessus was captured, Alexander didn't execute him quickly. He staged a punishment meant to send a message across Asia. Bessus was stripped, tied to wooden stakes, and slowly raised over a fire. Not thrown into flames, not burned all at once, but held just close enough for the heat to blister his skin, blacken his legs, and cook him alive over time. Burning was considered one of the most dishonorable deaths in Persian tradition. Alexander knew this. He chose it deliberately. Witnesses recorded that Bessus pleaded for death long before the flames finally took him. Alexander watched without emotion. Even Alexander's own officers remarked that this was one of his harshest punishments. For him, this wasn't cruelty. It was justice, and more importantly, a warning. No one decides the fate of kings except me. But Alexander's punishment, brutal as it was, targeted only one man. The next ruler punished entire groups, burying them beneath the weight of his empire. Number 8. Qin Shi Huang, burying 460 scholars alive. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, ruled through strict laws and absolute control. And when ideas threatened that control, he didn't debate them, he destroyed them. Confucian scholars openly criticized his rule, his conquests, and especially his harsh legalist policies. Qin didn't see them as harmless intellectuals. He saw them as threats to the stability of the empire he had just unified through war. So he ordered one of the most feared punishments in ancient China, the mass burial of scholars. Historical records from the Shiji say around 460 scholars were arrested after an inquiry inside the capital. They were accused of hiding forbidden texts, spreading dissent, or using old teachings to undermine Qin's authority. They were marched outside the capital to an execution ground where long trenches had already been dug. Soldiers forced them into the pits alive, lined up standing or kneeling, facing forward, still bound. There were no swords, no quick deaths. Just earth. Soldiers shoveled dirt over them, layer by layer. Cries turned to muffled gasps. Gasping turned to silence. The burial was slow, suffocating, and symbolic. Qin wanted the entire empire to understand. No philosophy, no scholar, and no tradition stood above the emperor's will. It remains one of the most extreme intellectual purges in recorded history. But the next punishment wasn't about silencing ideas, it was about punishing failure, and the emperor who ordered it chose a method designed to boil a man alive. Number 7. Muhammad II, boiling his governor alive. Muhammad II, the Ottoman Sultan who conquered Constantinople, expected absolute competence from the men he placed in power, and when one of his governors failed him, the punishment he delivered became one of the darkest moments of his rule. The incident began when the governor of Wallachia mishandled a critical military and political situation. His failure cost the empire resources, stability, and most importantly, Muhammad's trust. To him, failure at that level wasn't a mistake. It was betrayal. His failures in Wallachia embarrassed the empire and undermined Muhammad's authority. When the governor was brought before him, Muhammad didn't choose a sword or a hanging. He ordered a massive iron cauldron to be filled with water and placed over a fire. The governor was forced inside while the water was still warm. As the flames grew, the temperature rose slowly, painfully, cooking him from the legs upward. Skin blistered, muscles tore, nerves burned long before the water reached boiling point. Soldiers recorded that the man screamed until his voice broke, then continued to writhe in silence as the heat overwhelmed his body. There was no quick end, just a gradual slide into shock and death. It was one of the most severe punishments ever ordered by Muhammad, and it sent a clear warning across the empire. High rank offered no protection from the Sultan's wrath. But if this was the price for failure, the next punishment was reserved for something far more personal, the betrayal of blood. Number 6. Nader Shah, blinding his own son. Nader Shah, the conqueror who rebuilt Persia through raw force and relentless ambition, was feared by enemies and allies alike. But nothing showed the darkness of his rule more clearly than the punishment he ordered for his own blood. His eldest son, Reza Kohli, had been left in charge of the empire while Nader was on campaign. During that time, a revolt broke out, and rumors spread that Reza Kohli handled it brutally, even executing nobles without permission. When Nader returned, already paranoid from years of war and surrounded by plots and betrayal, he became convinced that his son was trying to take the throne. That suspicion cost Reza Kohli everything. Nader ordered that he be blinded, not by accident, not in battle, but by deliberate punishment. Red-hot metal rods were heated in a brazier. Guards held the prince down. The rods were pushed against his eyes. Some accounts say he screamed until he passed out. Others say he remained conscious through the entire ordeal. Either way, the result was the same. Reza Kohli, the heir to an empire, left the chamber permanently blind and permanently broken. Later, Nader reportedly regretted the decision, but the damage was irreversible. It was one of the most shocking punishments ever carried out by a Persian ruler. Not against an enemy, not against a traitor, but against his own son. And this punishment is still only the middle of the list. If this is what a father could do to his heir, the next ruler reserved his cruelty for entire cities and used animals as the instruments of death. Number 5. Ivan the Terrible, dogs and boiling cauldrons. Ivan IV of Russia, remembered as Ivan the Terrible, built his rule on fear, and no part of his reign made that clearer than the Oprichnina, a special force created to crush real and imagined plots against his throne. To Ivan, Disloyalty wasn't just betrayal. It was a disease that had to be eliminated publicly. Two punishments defined his brutality. The first punishment, death by dogs. Ivan's oprichniki rode black horses and wore black uniforms, often with dog heads and brooms attached to their saddles, symbols that they would sniff out treason and sweep it away. When Ivan condemned someone, the oprichniki unleashed trained, starving dogs to tear the victim apart. Limbs ripped, throats shredded. This wasn't only execution, it was humiliation designed to terrorize entire towns. The second punishment, death by boiling. For those he wanted to turn into public warnings, Ivan ordered execution by cauldron. Some were filled with water, others with boiling tar, far thicker, hotter, and more destructive. Victims were lowered in slowly, the tar tearing into skin and muscle instantly. There was no quick end. Crowds were forced to watch as the tar bubbled around the victims, their screams echoing across the square until the oprichniki declared the execution complete. During the years of the oprichnina, thousands were killed this way, as Ivan's paranoia deepened and his punishments became more theatrical and cruel. It remains one of the bleakest periods in Russian history, a time when terror wasn't a consequence, it was the strategy. But even Ivan's horrors pale compared to the next ruler, a man who built forests of death that took days, not moments, to claim their victims. Number 4. Vlad the Impaler. Slow impalement. Vlad III of Wallachia, remembered as Vlad the Impaler, did not use cruelty as a rumor or threat. He used it as a system, and his signature punishment became one of the most feared executions in all of medieval Europe. Slow impalement. When Vlad captured enemies, criminals, or rebels, he ordered a sharpened wooden stake to be pushed through the body, usually from the rectum or vagina, angled carefully to avoid major organs so the victim wouldn't die quickly. The stake wasn't meant to pierce the heart. It wasn't meant to kill cleanly. It was meant to keep the victim alive. Vlad often had the stakes deliberately rounded, not sharpened, so the victim wouldn't die too quickly. Once mounted on the stake, the victim's own body weight forced them downward inch by inch. Some died in hours. Others lasted 2 to 3 days, drifting in and out of consciousness as the stake slowly tore through them. The horror wasn't just the pain. It was the scale. When Vlad wanted to make a statement, he didn't use 10 stakes. He used thousands. Chroniclers describe entire hillsides lined with impaled bodies, forests of the dead, swaying in the wind, visible from miles away. It broke the morale of invading armies before battles even began. This wasn't random brutality. It was psychological warfare, engineered to make enemies fear Vlad long before they met him on the battlefield. It became one of the most notorious punishments in European history, a method so extreme it shaped the legend of Vlad for centuries. But as horrific as impalement was, the next empire perfected something even older, a punishment where the victim wasn't just killed. They were skinned alive. Number 3. Ashurbanipal. Flaying rebels alive. Ashurbanipal, king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, commanded one of the most feared armies of the ancient world, and he ruled with punishments designed to break the will of entire cities. His signature method was flaying, stripping the skin from a living person. When Ashurbanipal captured rebels, enemy leaders, or anyone who defied Assyrian rule, he ordered them tied to a pillar or wall. Soldiers used sharp knives to cut into the skin and peel it away slowly, starting at the legs or torso, working upward. The victim didn't die quickly. Shock came slowly. Pain lasted until the body could no longer endure it. But Ashurbanipal didn't stop there. The removed skin was displayed publicly, stretched on the walls of conquered cities, draped over gates, or nailed beside roads. It wasn't just an execution. It was a message. Some royal inscriptions even boast that rebels were flayed, and their skins used to cover city columns or piles of corpses. This wasn't chaotic brutality. It was administrative terror, recorded, organized, and used to intimidate every kingdom on Assyria's borders. Flaying under Ashurbanipal became one of the most infamous punishments in the ancient world, feared from the Mediterranean to Mesopotamia. But while flaying destroyed the body, the next punishment crushed the person slowly, without spilling a single drop of blood. Number 2. Genghis Khan, crushing nobles under wooden boards. Genghis Khan ruled the largest land empire in history, with a mixture of speed, strategy, and controlled brutality. But when it came to punishing noble enemies, he used a method unlike anything seen in Europe or Asia at the time. He forbade the shedding of noble blood, a Mongol tradition and a religious rule. So when a prince, Khan, or aristocrat betrayed him, he needed a punishment that killed without cutting. His solution was simple and horrifying. The condemned noble was laid on the ground. A wooden board or platform was placed over his chest. Then heavy stones, metal weights, or even entire groups of soldiers stood on top. Slowly, the pressure increased. Ribs bent, then snapped. Organs ruptured internally. The victim suffocated under the crushing weight, dying without a single drop of blood touching the earth. Sometimes the process took hours. In rare cases, a full day. This wasn't chaos or torture for spectacle. It was a ritual killing, bloodless, deliberate, and used only for high-ranking enemies whose execution needed to satisfy law, tradition, and fear all at once. It became one of the most unique punishments in Mongol history, a method that combined legal tradition with absolute dominance. But even this slow, crushing death doesn't compare to the final punishment on this list, a method so cruel, victims were cooked, crushed, and suffocated in one unthinkable execution. Number 1. Attila the Hun, the sandwich execution, over hot coals. Attila the Hun built his reputation on fear, swift raids, burned cities, and absolute dominance over those who defied him. But the punishment he reserved for traitors wasn't just brutal. It was deliberately constructed to destroy a person in every possible way. This execution had a name among Attila's enemies: the sandwich. The condemned man was forced to lie flat on the ground. A wide wooden plank was placed directly on top of him, pinning him down. Then another board was added on top of that, turning his body into the filling between two slabs of wood. The executioner stood or sat on the upper board, increasing the pressure. Ribs cracked. Air was forced from the lungs. But the true horror hadn't even begun yet. Beneath the lower board, Attila ordered hot coals or embers to be shoveled in. The victim couldn't move, couldn't escape, couldn't even twist away from the heat. The fire slowly roasted the flesh from below, while the weight from above crushed the body from above. A dual torment, burning, suffocating, and compressing all at once. Some victims died from heat, some from suffocation, some from internal rupture, but all of them died slowly. This punishment was not routine. It wasn't used for common criminals. It was reserved for traitors, anyone Attila believed had betrayed his trust, his authority, or his empire. Among all recorded punishments used by conquerors, this one stands out for its combination of heat, crushing pressure, and total helplessness. It was not execution. It was annihilation. Conquerors ruled through armies, strategy, and empire building, but their power always rested on something darker: the fear of what happened when you crossed them. These 10 punishments weren't random acts of violence. They were tools designed to control soldiers, crush rebellion, silence ideas, or destroy betrayal. Their empires rose and fell. Their victories faded. But the terror they created, that part survived. Because long after a conqueror dies, fear is the last thing his enemies remember.